What's the first thing you think of when you hear the word conspiracy theory? If you're anything like everybody, you'll probably think of either the JFK assassination or the flat earth or lizard people controlling the whole planet. So, on some level, it seems as though we have created a caricature of conspiracy minded people. They either live in their mom's basement and they wear tinfoil hats, they listen to Alex Jones all day, and they voted for Donald J. Trump. Well, what if I told you that none of these people really had an impact on me? I don't live in my mom's basement, I don't think aliens actually control the planet, and I don't believe in the flat earth. What I do believe, however, is that people are easily controlled and manipulated, and I think that corporations essentially run the entire planet at this point, and that they control the news.
The sharing of biased and
False news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish things they think are true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think.
I majored in journalism, and those have been my biggest influences. This includes MIT professor Noam Chomsky, Watergate journalist Carl Bernstein, and most importantly, here is Jon Stewart, creator and host of The Daily Show, who had a tremendously big impact on me back in 2012. But first, here's me. Well, you can't see me, but I'm somewhere in that crowd of thousands and thousands of people. This was back in 2008, following the Obama victory, the night of his election. Yes, that's right, I was like any other American, voting or dying, in the words of Paris Hilton. I guess I'm trying to establish that I was semi-normal, or that I am semi-normal. Here's me as a hippie when I was 18. Here's me when I shaved my head after I got into spirituality. Here's me in Brazil. And here's me in Israel in 2012, which is the same year as the Jon Stewart episode featuring the politician Ron Paul came out.
This pretending Ron Paul doesn't exist for some reason has been going on for weeks.
A new Gallup survey showing Rick Perry running second to Mitt Romney, knocking down Iowa favorite Michelle Bachmann to fourth.
Behind who? Fourth behind who? How did libertarian Ron Paul become the 13th floor in a hotel?
Now, if you were paying close attention, you will see that that clip was from MSNBC. But if you watch the rest of the episode, you will also see that Fox News was implicated, along with CNN, and finally, CBS News. So the question that results from all of this is whether or not there was actually a conspiracy, and that's the complicated question. Did 4 news outlets conspire to censor election results? Now, in order to understand this puzzle, you actually have to look up the biggest stakeholders in stocks for these news corporations. We'll start off with ABC News, which is controlled by Disney, which is owned by Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. MSNBC is controlled by Comcast, which is again owned by Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. CBS News, which is controlled by Paramount, is largely controlled by Vanguard, State Street, and BlackRock. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll see that every corporation is owned by about 3 companies, right? BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. Now, the crazy thing is, even when a company is not controlled by those 3 companies, they still are. Fox News is a perfect example of this. While it looks like News Corporation, which owns Fox, is controlled by SoFi Technologies, looking closely at SoFi, you'll see that it's owned by Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. But if you're anything like me, you already knew that Fox News was controlled in the first place. At this juncture, one question we can ask ourselves is whether or not Fox News is any worse or better than any other news company. Let's take a look at the New York Times, which is owned by Vanguard, BlackRock, and T. Rowe Price Investment Management. Now, who owns T. Rowe? Well, Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street again. If you look at these 3 companies, they all basically own each other too, and they all have trillions of dollars in assets. Now, something you might want to ask yourself at this point is, what are the implications for democracy? What are the implications for our political process if this is the case? I think we have to ask ourselves, to what degree is it impacting elections? And considering that Barack Obama and McCain were both funded by the same corporations that are largely owned by Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street, we might not really understand democracy, whatever that means, without this analysis. And if you didn't know that, there's probably a lot you don't know, which isn't really your fault considering that billionaires and trillionaires have a complete monopoly over the entire media industry. But look, I'm not here to tell you what to believe, I'm just hopefully here to inspire some critical thinking. So to conclude, while I don't think the Earth is flat, I do think that it's weird that 4 separate news corporations all censored the same election results. And I think it's weird that nobody seems to know that the former DEA head accused the CIA of trafficking cocaine. And isn't it sort of strange that John Kerry and George Bush ran against each other in 2004, but they were frat brothers before that? And by the way, no one here is saying that you're brainwashed. My biggest hope is that you'll just think about who and what has influenced you the most in life. Because if you're not aware of that, you might be missing some really big puzzle pieces. And you might not have the slightest clue as to the difference between a conspiracy theory and what could possibly be conspiracy truth. So am I a conspiracy theorist or a conspiracy truthist? You decide.
Good Morning America is brought to you by Pfizer.
CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer.
Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer. Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer.
CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Early Start. Brought to you by Pfizer. Friday night on Aaron Burnett Out Front. Brought to you by Pfizer. This week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Pfizer. Today's countdown to the royal wedding is brought to you by Pfizer. And now a CBS Sports Update brought to you by Pfizer. Meet the Press. Data download. Brought to you by Pfizer. This portion of CBS This Morning sponsored by...
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon. Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon. Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon. Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
I scream, you know the rest. I scream, you scream, and you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, you know the rest.
I don't find that funny. I find it scary.